You're listening to The Real Well Show with Kathy Fettke, the real estate investor's resource.
Imagine if you showed up at a lot that you own only to find out that somebody's already building something on it, and that person thinks that they bought that lot legitimately. I'm Kathy Fettke, and welcome to The Real Well Show. Apparently, this type of title fraud is on the rise, especially for vacant land. Our guest today has some experience in how to handle these types of situations and how to prevent them altogether. Elizabeth Blosser is Vice President of Government Affairs for the American Land Title Association, or ALTA. She oversees the association's state legislative efforts, including annually monitoring state bills related to the real estate, mortgage, and title industries. And she's here with us today on The Real Well Show. So, Elizabeth, welcome.
Thanks so much for having me, and thanks for talking about this very important topic.
So it sounds like this is a bigger problem than wire fraud. Tell me more about it.
Well, if you look at data, whether it's coming from government sources or private sources, fraud is just on the rise overall. And unfortunately, that's part of kind of living in this digital age. If you think about it, in times past, if somebody wanted to steal something from you, they had to come to your neighborhood and they had to come to your house. Today, in the digital world, people are able to steal from you from the comfort of their own home, wherever that is in the world. And so, these crimes, these financial cyber crimes are very important. They are a threat to consumers. We think it's something that lawmakers, law enforcement, the private sector, the public sector, everybody needs to come together to take a good look at. You mentioned wire fraud. That's obviously been something really important that we've been looking at from the title industry perspective for well over a decade. So fraud has certainly been on our minds. We've taken a lot of steps to provide education about real estate wire fraud and to implement tools to help combat it. But title agents are always kind of looking for anomalies in transactions and things that might be a threat to consumers and to the real estate market. And so my ears perked up a little over a year ago when title agents came to the American Land Title Association and said, we're really concerned about this new fraud that's out there. And we coined the term seller impersonation fraud.
Yeah. So how does it show up? What happens?
So basically, at its core, someone is trying to sell real estate that they don't own. So here's kind of how the fraud works. You have a scammer who's going to review public records and whatever other data sources they may have access to. And they're going to try and identify a property that they would like to fraudulently sell. The properties are going to have some common traits. They're generally going to be non-owner occupied properties, so vacant land, vacation homes, investment, real estate, rentals, things of that nature. And they're usually also going to be properties that don't have any encumbrances, meaning there's no outstanding liens or loans on the property. So the fraudsters then reach out to a real estate agent and proceed to list this property for sale. Now, nobody is likely to see the fraudsters. They're going to try and communicate 100% via email or maybe text. They aren't going to want to come to your office. They aren't going to want to do a video chat. They probably aren't even going to want to talk to you on the phone. So they're going to have minimal contact. They're going to tell the realtor, hey, we want a quick sale, so we're okay taking below market value for this property. So it's going to appear as a really good deal. They're going to want cash offers and they're going to want to close really quickly. They're going to say they're unavailable for closings. They want to be able to sign their papers with a notary wherever they are at. And they're going to want to have all of the proceeds from the sale wired to them. So that's kind of the scam. The good news is the vast majority of these are being caught before the transaction closes, which is the good news. But unfortunately, some of them are still getting through. And, when you think about the level of sophistication and, some instances, these fraudsters are using the actual driver's license and social security numbers of the
Wow.
real owners. And oftentimes they're using legitimate notary information, and that could happen with or without the notary's knowledge. So there is a level of sophistication, and I think that's the frustrating thing with all of this cybercrime is, every time you think you've figured out an answer, like the scene changes, and so it's a constant battle to stay vigilant and make people aware of kind of what's happening in the marketplace. I mean, I think the more that real estate professionals and consumers are aware of this threat, the better off we are in combating it.
How do they get the driver's license? They just go to the DMV and get a new one or something?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of stuff, unfortunately, available on the dark web and through other means. And so, again, these are fraudsters that can be, in some instances, very sophisticated.
Sure. Yeah. Especially when we're talking about big checks like that. Oh my goodness. Okay. So you could own a piece of land, maybe not have a lot of people don't visit their land that they own. They might show up one day and see there's a house on it or somebody's using it, right? If they don't know that this transaction happened.
Yeah, the fraudsters are going to want the transaction to happen rather quickly, right? They're going to want as few people involved in the transaction as possible. So they're going to want to get the deal done. But to your point, it can be quite a while before somebody notices the fraud. And with fraud, the more time that passes, the worse the situation gets. And so we're always trying to educate people too on ways they can protect themselves. And preventative measures they can take. If you are a property owner, many counties offer free monitoring services so that you get notified if anything is recorded regarding your property. So you can sign up for those alerts. Checking your credit with frequency is important. And then if you're a buyer, it doesn't matter if it's romance or real estate. If it's too good to be true, start asking some really hard questions.
Yeah. I mean, that happens all the time. My daughter's been harassed many times when she's just trying to find a place to rent. The fraud is huge. She's like, look at this place online. It's so cheap. I'm like, yeah, that's because it's not real, honey.
It's tough. It's rampant. And, a lot of the fraudsters appeal to sort of what we hope is true.
Yes.
And when you think about this type of crime and sort of the real estate environment we're in, it's really tempting when there's, really not a lot of inventory out there to, do a quick transaction and snap up a piece of property. And I think in the real estate market too today, everybody wants to make the deals work. And so it really takes slowing down, stopping, and asking questions. I find it interesting that fraudsters really are working to keep additional parties out of the transaction. And I think there's a lot of technological solutions that you can employ to address these types of crimes, but you can't underestimate just the value of human intuition. It only takes one person in the transaction to ask a question, one person to slow down, call the listing agent and say, hey, where did you get this referral? Have you ever met this person? If it's, a property that has a structure on it, was it toured or are people buying sort of sight unseen? I think, bypassing those important steps in a transaction is also what can get you into some trouble.
So you say it's a larger issue than wire fraud. What kind of numbers are we talking?
So we don't have hard numbers on this today. And I would say, I don't know that I would say it was a larger issue than wire fraud. I would say it's sort of equivalent to, if you look back a handful of years to where we were at wire fraud, where it's just sort of an emerging fraud. And so it is definitely front and center for our industry. It doesn't matter if you're talking to realtors, title agents, county recorders who handle the local land records. Everybody is talking about these crimes. You're seeing reports of it in the media, which indicates sort of an uptick. We have done a survey or seen survey results that show about 73% of real estate professionals have reported an uptick in this type of crime. And then you're also seeing some interest from law enforcement, which is great. The Secret Service put out an advisory recently on this particular fraud scheme.
Are there areas where it's happening more than others?
I don't know from a geographic perspective if there's places. I haven't heard of any place where it's not happening, but I think it goes back to kind of looking at those property traits. So it's less about where the property is and more about the traits of the property. Again, that it's not owner occupied and that there's no liens, mortgage, or any other encumbrance on the property.
So what happens if the fraud goes through and the title company, I'm assuming, well, is there usually title insurance in this transaction? I'm guessing not.
Well, we always hope that there's title insurance in every transaction. Let me talk a little bit about the victims and then kind of what happens, because in this crime, there's really the two victims. There's the unsuspecting buyer, and then there's the legitimate owner. So the unsuspecting buyer, has a transaction that actually goes through, assuming that they have purchased an owner's title and policy, they are going to be covered. I would say the caveat to that is they may not be able to retain the property. It may be a situation where they're financially made whole. And then, they need to be considering on the front end, especially if they're buying vacant land, what coverages they need. So there's nobody in a real estate transaction other than a title agent who can really explain to you your options, and there are a lot, for title insurance coverages and talk about what is available to you. So hopefully people have gotten that coverage. If they're building structures, they've set it up so that they can make modifications to the policy once those are in place. If you are the actual owner of the property, you are, going to need to report the crime. And unfortunately, you probably are going to have to hire an attorney to sort everything out, to help untangle the fraudulent transaction and, take any other action you need. But you should also be reaching out to your title company to see what sort of policy you have. There's on residential properties, there's two types of policy. There's an owner's policy and a homeowner's policy. The homeowner's policy does cover forgery post policy. So that policy isn't available everywhere, but it's available in the vast majority of the country. There's a few states where state regulators haven't approved it. But that does give you coverage because title insurance comes with a duty to defend, which means that your legal costs and things are going to be covered. So again, it's really comes down to being that savvy consumer and kind of asking these questions when you're making a real estate transaction about what kind of coverages are available to you.
Wow. Okay. So we've talked about how you can find out and be alerted. And what is the service that you said that people can sign up for?
So a lot of counties, the local county government that handles the land records and records deeds, mortgages, etc., they have services available to their constituents that are free monitoring services. So you can often go to the county's website or call the county recorder or clerk's office and just ask to be put on the monitoring service. So then they will notify you if anything is recorded against your property.
And let's just talk about wire fraud, because this actually has happened to us in one of our projects. What do people need to do to protect themselves from wire fraud?
Well, you should be suspicious of everything, right? If you're savvy, you should be suspicious, always looking for those phishing emails. That's generally where wire fraud comes in, right? Somebody gets into the transaction and into the communication. You have to be talking to the title company about the wiring instructions. And most title companies have like a huge block at the bottom of their signatures that say, we will never email you wiring instructions, right?
Yeah, you have to call and get all the
right.
information.
And it's just like, sign here that you understand. We will never, email you wiring instructions. And so I think for consumers, it's paying attention to that sort of thing. Again, in a real estate transaction, there's so much happening. Potentially you're moving, you've got all of these other life things going on, and it's a daunting amount of paperwork and things like that. But again, sort of taking the time, hopefully your realtor, your title agent, and others are sort of, telling you about what the red flags might be along the way. And then, of course, early detection is always important in wire fraud. It's super hard to get those funds back, but if you act really quickly, sometimes there is that opportunity.
Yeah, I can't emphasize this enough. Just pick up the phone, call your title company, and confirm the wire over the phone. Get the numbers, make sure you're doing it right, because they are tricky, these fraudsters. I don't know how they do it. They get in there and change the numbers, or they somehow fish the emails. I don't know, but just call the title company before you send money.
Right. And don't call the number in emails that you've received, don't hit reply. It's really go to the website, go to the information they maybe provided you when you met in person or you got a welcome packet, and use that contact information. Whether it's wire fraud or it's the seller impersonation fraud, I think title agents play a little bit of detective on a lot of this stuff. They are looking for red flags. They may employ technology to try and do multi-factor authentication of the seller. They may be running their phone number or email address to see if it's legitimate. But a lot of it is just basic detective work, picking up the phone, talking to the realtor, checking signatures on other real estate documents compared to the signature of the, alleged seller, reaching out, using contact information that was available in public records or maybe tax records, calling the sellers and asking them questions about the property that aren't going to be readily available online. So those types of just sort of kind of almost old school detective work can be really helpful in these instances.
Yeah. Great stuff. All right. Any last tips for our listeners so that they don't end up with somebody fraudulently selling their land, or you buying land that isn't for sale?
Yeah, I mean, there's the preventative measures that you can take. Just always be cognizant of the things that are happening in the transaction. If you can sign up for monitoring services, that's great. If you are an investor and you have a large tract of undeveloped land, you might want to reach out to some realtors and say it's not for sale. I mean, maybe people should be putting up not for sale signs in some of these instances. And then, really make sure that you are talking with title professionals as you're going through a real estate transaction, and making sure that you understand the coverages that are available to you.
Excellent. Well, Elizabeth, thank you so much for all these tips. I think hopefully you've saved realtors and buyers and sellers from potential fraud.
That's our goal. Thanks so much for having us on to talk about the important issue.
Thank you. And thank you for joining me here on The Real Wealth Show. If you want to learn more ways to protect yourself as a real estate investor, just go to realwealthshow.com. We have over 500 webinars. They are free, and it's free to join, that will help you on your journey. Obviously, 500 webinars sounds overwhelming, but you can just listen to one a day or once a week to improve your education. Again, I'm Kathy Fettke. Thanks for joining me here on The Real Wealth Show. We'll see you next time.
The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are provided for informational purposes only and should not be construed as an offer to buy or sell any securities or to make or consider any investment or course of action. For more information, go to realwealthshow.com.